Hi guys, so my lesson is mostly about civil rights review. It is more of a critical thinking lesson, so we are going to go through things that you've most likely learned before. I do just want to foster a new way of thinking and talk about how civil rights history has impacted our society today. So, going down to the contents, we're starting with early American civil rights history. Again, most of you should be familiar with this, but we are going to talk about a slave rebellion and an abolitionist rebellion that you might not be familiar with, the Emancipation Proclamation, Plessy v. Ferguson, and then the civil rights movement, which hopefully most of you will think of as review. And then we're going to talk about today with the tension, build up, police brutality, and then we're going to talk about the critical thinking exercise at the end. So, like I said, we're going to start with early civil rights history. Again, the first thing we're going to talk about is Nat Turner's Rebellion in 1831. This is a slave rebellion that took place in Southampton, Virginia, over a couple days. It was just a small gathering. He brought together a few slaves, and he went on a mission to kill his slave owner's wife, and their children. After that, they did go for a couple days, just going house to house and murdering people. It was ended up being about 60 white people murdered during that time. Here you can see a short video link. I'm not going to show that to you now, but please take time to watch that. It's only about 2 minutes, and it's about his rebellion. It's very insightful. Okay, and then if we go down, you see Brown's raid on Harper's Ferry in 1859. This is actually an abolitionist rebellion. It wasn't very successful, but again, it was in West Virginia. He was trying to incite a slave revolt or uprising because he was very anti-slave. Again, he was an abolitionist, but he did gather quite a large group and tried to take over the arsenal at Harper's Ferry. He didn't plan ahead, so law enforcement was quite quickly aware of his plan and what he was doing. So his plan ended up failing. In this one, there were about 16 casualties, black people and John Brown's people. Okay, and then down to something you guys are probably more familiar with is the Emancipation Proclamation, 1863. So we all know that Abraham Lincoln signed this legislation into law, freeing all slaves in the United States. Now, the only issue with that is why I say hypothetically freed all slaves near the end of the Civil War was because places like Texas and other western or really southern states had a lack of regulation that made 100% freedom impossible. Most places did continue to have some kind of slavery for a long while after the Emancipation Proclamation. Again, just because there wasn't enough people out in the West or some places in the South to regulate such a law. Okay, and then skip ahead about 30 years. Plessy versus Ferguson, most people again should be familiar with. The Supreme Court ruling that stated the practice of separate but equal was constitutional as long as separate facilities were of equal quality. Now, this came about because a student was going to a school that had very lackluster supplies compared to a white school, and they wanted to go to the white school. Now, on paper, that sure does sound great, separate but equal. But as we know, later on in the 50s and into the 60s, there was rampant segregation, blacks only water fountains, going to the back of restaurants, blacks only pools, and schools. It was not uncommon to see that much further into the future, and that this law did help a lot with people who wanted to keep the United States segregated. Okay, so civil rights in modern history. First, we're going to talk about Martin Luther King Jr. Obviously, a staple of the civil rights movement in the 1960s. He was responsible for a lot of different civil rights activism, such as the Memphis sanitation workers strike, the Montgomery bus boycott, and the March on Washington, and plenty, plenty, plenty more. Now, we all know that he was more for the nonviolent civil rights movement approach. Now, if we go down, that is very unlike Malcolm X. Malcolm X was for protecting black Americans by any means necessary. He said that if, white people and white supremacists are attacking his people violently, then he is going to fight back using fire with fire. He was also a black nationalist, so he was really urging the black people of America to find their own individualism, to be more comfortable in their own skin instead of assimilating with the white society of America just for the equal rights. He wanted individualism and equal rights. And as you can see, he was also one of the main leaders of the Black Power movement, which again is more about that individualism and feeling strength in your own culture. And then down again, we have Rodney King and the LA riots, 1991. So this is quite a far jump ahead. So Rodney King was pulled over for drunk driving, and he was beat by the three officers and one sergeant that had pulled him over. He was beaten with their clubs over 50 times and ended up having multiple, I think around 11 fractures in his face. All three cops and the one sergeant were acquitted for their actions, so they were not charged with anything at all. The public was outraged, and this resulted in riots all across LA. It was actually they saw like the biggest riots since around the 1965, and there was dozens of deaths. The city was burning. There was just major outrage when it came to the public and the ruling of those cops and sergeant being acquitted for their crimes. Okay, now if we go down to today, this one obviously everyone will be pretty familiar with. So we're going to talk about tension buildup, rise in white supremacy. So Unite the Right rally. If anybody remembers, I think it was about 2 years ago. Unite the Right, what happened in Charlottesville, Virginia. The white supremacists were protesting the removal of the Robert E. Lee statue. Now, this isn't just white supremacists who are affiliated with groups or anything like that. It is also white supremacist supporters. So people who may be more closeted about that on a daily basis, they also came out to support the cause and protest about the removal of the Robert E. Lee statue. Now, this ended up being a huge issue. The state ended up making it a state of emergency because the white supremacists and supporters were met with counter protesters, people who were against white supremacy and inequality. This actually ended up in one death. Heather Heyer, she was somebody that was fatally hit by the car that was run into the large group of protesters who were anti-white supremacy. So now I'll go down to presidential response. Our president now, Donald Trump, was interviewed on television, and he condemned on live television an egregious display of hatred, bigotry, and violence on both sides. And he later stated that there were fine people on both sides of the issue, stating that many people on the side of white supremacists were fine people. If you've been watching the recent debates, you will see that that's been a huge issue, and it's come up a lot of times, talking about Black America and equal rights and each candidate's plan for the future. So I just wanted to make a quick note that police brutality has been an issue in America for too many years. Below is just a few of the Black men and women who've been murdered by our city's protectors in the last 2 years. If you want, I would highly encourage you to look up some of the people that you aren't familiar with and do some research about how they died, what they did to incite such rage from the cops. I think it'd be really helpful, really insightful for people of today, especially us young people. Okay, and then something I'm really excited about, I did want to do a critical thinking exercise. Like I said, I wanted most of this to be forcing us to think outside of what we would normally do in a college, just any lesson. So I had a few questions that I did want to ask you. Thinking of everything we've just reviewed, does looking at civil rights history as a whole make you think differently about where our society is now? Do we have further to go in the direction of equality in your opinion? What do you think your role in the country's journey to equality is? I know that's very loaded. I do want you to write at least 400 to 600 words. Feel free to write more if you want to. But yes, I would like you to write 400 to 600 words answering every single one of the questions I just posed. You can use outside sources if you like, anecdotes from your own life to support your answer. I will also have this presentation on Google Classroom as well as some other resources about civil rights history. So you can use any of those as well. And there is already a section to turn this in on Google Classroom. Again, be sure to watch the Rodney King Ed Puzzle video. Again, it's on Google Classroom. There's only 2 questions. They're open-ended. I just want to know your opinion about the video. So yes, I'm really excited to hear you guys' responses. I'm really excited about this lesson. I hope that it opens a lot of people's eyes and gets them more involved in our politics today. Have a great day.